everybody. I have a lovely guest today, one of the great joys in my life, Joli Knott, who is an intuitive astrologer and intuitive healer. There's so many modalities that you do, Joli. I'm not even going to introduce them, but I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Joanna. So happy to be here with you. So exciting. Yep. Hi, I'm American, as you can probably hear from my accent. I grew up. I was actually, well, I was born on the West Coast, grew up on the East Coast. My parents are immigrants from India, so I've kind of always had this thing about straddling two cultures, and then I have spent a lot of my adult life abroad. So I was in Japan for about 20 years, and then I'm currently in the UK and have been here for about 8. So yeah, it's been a really interesting ride to say the least, and it's just so nice for me because astrology has always been kind of in the background for me since I was little. Of course, Vedic astrology is huge in India, and I grew up hearing stories about what was in my grandfather's astrological chart, or how the time my dad visited my mom's house, and my great grandmother was like, get the charts," and things like that. So it's yeah, it's just been this really lovely journey to now, and I'm just so excited to talk about our topic today.
So it was basically like me growing up in an Irish household, but with tea leaves, but you with astrological charts. Where
That's
everybody
actually
had to
a
do a
really good
reading, right?
point. It's funny that you say that because the big thing in India as well was palm reading. And I will never forget my uncle reading my palm. And I probably was, I don't know, maybe 15, 16 years old. But my younger brother had already been born, and he's 11 years younger than me. And I really loved taking care of him. So I kept thinking, oh, I want to be a young mom like my mother was. She had me when she was 21, 22. And my uncle was reading my palm, and he was like, yeah, you're going to get married really, really late. And I'm like, late? What does that mean? Like 27, 28? And little did I know, in fact, I saw an astrologer, and she said to me, I asked her the same question, and she said, look, stop focusing on that. You've got other things that you need to take care of. It'll all be settled by the time you're 37. And I was like, 37? I was just so shocked. But interestingly enough, I got engaged when I was 37 and married just before I turned 38, and had my daughter when I was 42. So go figure.
So they
It's
knew what they
really
were talking about. See, this stuff
they
is real. So the Christmas star is happening, and it's a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, right? In 0 degrees of Aquarius.
That's it.
So what
That's
does that
it.
mean, Jolly? Tell me
So
everything.
so one thing that I want to mention right at the start is that this is very much a big deal, because the last time Jupiter and Saturn conjunct roughly every 20 years. It's 19.6 to be exact. And usually, when we have this, it's called the Great Conjunction of these two planets that are um, respectively the sixth and seventh planet. They're the last planets that you can see with the naked eye. And so for the ancients, these were a big deal. And when they conjunct, there's usually this feeling that there's like this changing of the guard. However, this time, Jupiter and Saturn are conjuncting in Aquarius, as you said. And what's been happening really for the last 200 years is they've been conjuncting in Earth signs. Apart from 1980, 81, there was a conjunction in Libra, but basically for the last 200 years they've been conjuncting in earth signs. So now we're changing elements, and they are going to be conjuncting in air signs for the next 200 years. So we're setting up not just a 20-year cycle, but a 200-year cycle as well. So that's one reason why it's a big deal. And then another reason is because we have this conjunction in Aquarius at 0 degrees. So the last time they were conjunct in Aquarius was in 1405. So we're
Wow.
looking at like a 600-year span. And it's also the fact that they are so close. They are going to be 0.06 degrees apart. So that is just so ridiculously close to each other. In fact, they speculate that it was a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn with the addition of Venus that was the Bethlehem star that the Magi
Magi, I think.
Magi,
Those
sorry,
guys, the wise
we're
guys.
the three guys, yeah, we're following in when Jesus was born. So yeah.
So was that also like was it also like on a moving into a sign, did you say? Like, did that happen then as well? Like this whole changing of the guard and going into a new sign?
Well,
Do you
so
know?
the changing of the guard will happen regardless of what degree the conjunction is happening. So that happens regardless. With the conjunction in 2000, so 20 years ago, it was Saturn and Jupiter conjuncting in Taurus. So it's interesting how you get these patterns. Taurus is a fixed sign, as is Aquarius, but it's in the element of Earth. So we're talking about change on a very material plane. With this conjunction in air, there's almost an emphasis on how we think, how we communicate, and an emphasis on technology because Aquarius is associated with innovation and bringing in the new, if you will. The main, I think, meaning behind Aquarius is to do with community, in fact, and often they talk about it as the brotherhood or sisterhood of human beings. Um, One of the sayings that I absolutely love is community is not just a group of like-minded souls. True community is the art form of diversity. And I think
Mm.
this is the challenge that we have ahead of us. How can we recognize everyone's uniqueness, but still come together in community? And I deliberately choose the word unique as opposed to special.
Oh, I don't like the word special.
Mm. And all the kind of connotations that come with it, I think it really misguides people. And part of what we're grappling with right now is, you have these, my opinion is as good as your facts, or my
Yeah.
facts are as good as your opinions. It's this real kind of clash between the individual and the whole.
The collective, yeah. And
Mm.
I think one of the most freeing things I ever decided was that I'm not special. The moment I decided I'm not special, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to be remembered in 200 years. The moment I decided that, I became free because none of that
Mm.
little petty stuff really mattered anymore because I lost all of that with that whole I have to do something so important when really I just have to get through the day. And
I
that's
love that. I love
it's like
that.
a much easier way, and it allows you to make mistakes because if you're special,
Yes.
you can't make mistakes. But going back to this idea of diversity in community, I find that very interesting, especially when you look in the year in review, right? Because of
Mm.
all the clashes, especially to your homeland in the States just south of me, where there were a lot of the polarization seemed to be incredibly extreme there. and this notion of special versus inclusive. Do you
Mm,
have any sort of, do you think that, because I've been talking about this past year as a shedding year where like all the wounding has to come up and get clear for whatever reason. I didn't know at that time about this major conjunction in Aquarius and that we're moving into the age of Aquarius. I can keep hearing that song in my head. The age of Aquarius. Anyway, sorry. I'm a terrible singer. but but
you're
like
fine.
but as we're like it's almost like everybody went through, and I think we've spoken about this before, like everybody went through like their own individual issue and a collective issue, and every month it was like a different thing, and some of it was really crazy, like the zombie
Mm,
cicadas were pretty crazy. But like
mm, mm.
everybody was going through this, and it seems like it just like rid us all of like so much collective baggage. So does that normally happen as you lead up to these changing of the guards?
No, not necessarily. So I think one thing that we also have to introduce into the mix is Uranus. So Uranus at the moment is in the early degrees of Taurus. And what we did have um, is this kind of, I guess you could say, tension between Taurus and the planets Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn in the final degrees of Capricorn. That pressure is going to intensify as Jupiter and Saturn move into Aquarius, because what you are going to get is actually a square. So square is 90 degrees apart. It's a very dynamic tension where you have two very different kind of points of view that is your job to integrate, but it's not easy. I always talk about squares as like, being on two sides of a building. They can't see each other. So that makes it even harder to figure out how they're going to integrate, if you will. But it is possible. And when you get that breakthrough, that sense of achievement is huge. Um, so one thing that I think a lot of people were, sorry, I should say a lot of astrologers were talking about was the fact that when you had Uranus being activated at certain points over the past year, there was a correlation with civil unrest. And in fact, that is what Saturn square Uranus represents. It's Saturn, law and order, and Uranus, let's rip it up, let's change it up, let's, make it all new, right? Shiny and new. And so you've got this revolutionary aspect and the traditional old guard, revolutionary aspect of Uranus and the traditional old guard of Saturn. And they are going to basically be squaring each other. So that 90-degree angle for kind of all of next year. That's going to be one of the big signatures, in addition to this great conjunction that we're focusing on today. But that's going to be a signature that's going to also be big and playing in the background. And it does point to people demonstrating, people, kind of demanding for change. Um, I was listening to the astrology podcast and it was really interesting. They were talking about Uranus, so, revolutionary, rebel, and Taurus, which is earth, gardening, farming. And lo and behold, we're seeing the biggest protests in history in India of the farmers. That is the symbolism there. It's just amazing. Uranus and Taurus,
I know
the
sometimes
farmers protesting. So amazing to me.
sometimes talking to you freaks me out when you give me like specific dates and I go and I look them up and I'm like, oh, like like your symbolism, because I'm not a natural at it, astrology at all, as you know, like we've talked about this. I've tried. like I try everything, but your way of interpreting it is so interesting because you look at the symbols and then you're able to integrate them into like what's actually happening. So I think you're so cool,
Mm.
Jolly. Gosh, gosh, gosh. But yeah,
Feeling is mutual.
because the farming thing is going on. Like they even had protests here in Toronto about with the farmers. They thought it was something else to begin with, and then they realized, oh, it's the Indian farmers.
I mean, it's fascinating. So Uranus and Taurus, Taurus is associated not only with the land, but it's also associated with finance and banking because, you think about it, like the cows, capital comes from capita, from cows. You counted how many cows you had. So, so that's where you have this kind of connection to capital, money, resources, currency, and and then food production because it's farming. So Uranus in Taurus really does suggest that there is going to be a huge shakeup in food production, in currencies, Bitcoin. I mean, I think the digital currencies, cryptocurrencies, are going to most likely see a lot of volatility, particularly with Mars going into Taurus after January 2nd. So, that there's a lot going on there, but I'll bring it back down to Jupiter and Saturn because I know it's very
I
easy for me
know
to
you and
go.
me, we both distract each other. We all get excited and we're like, "Yeah, let's talk about tomatoes."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, so Jupiter and Saturn, I think in Aquarius is it's such an interesting signature for us coming up because there's a lot of people who are worried. When you have Saturn in Aquarius, and Saturn will be hanging out in Aquarius until 2023. So it's roughly 2.5 years in each sign for Saturn. Jupiter only stays in a sign for roughly 1 year. So Jupiter will be hanging out with Saturn all of next year. And then in December, it will go into Pisces. It does go into Pisces briefly, I think in June or July, but then it retrogrades back into Aquarius. So it's really difficult because if you look at some of the Saturn and Aquarius folks, you have these people who really speak to, sometimes they speak to real change, but often there's this like element of dystopia. I mean, I think George Orwell had Saturn and Aquarius, and of course Animal Farm in 1984. I mean, these are really dystopian stories that on some level aren't that far-fetched considering, what we're seeing in the world today. So, but it's that idea that you have to go through, when you're birthing something new, you have to go through the birth canal. You have to have that compression and, be cooked in the crucible before you can kind of come out on the other end. So, um, yeah, it's the good news is that we have Jupiter, which is known as the greater benefic. Venus is known as the lesser benefic, but Jupiter has this kind of expansive quality to it, and it's about faith and beliefs and abundance and generosity. I mean, like anything, it's got a higher octave and a lower octave. Those are all the higher octave qualities. In its lower octave, it can speak to excess and greed. So,
Mm,
I think we need to really understand, and it's the same with Saturn, right? So the higher octaves of Saturn is um, having a self-possessed understanding of laws and rules and structures and being able to operate within that container in such a way that allows growth and maturity. But in the lower octave of Saturn, you're looking at constrictions, restrictions. You could almost argue censorship. And so, the, if you wanted to really make it dystopian, then you could say, well, Jupiter is excessive control, Saturn, of the airwaves, Aquarius. And that would be this whole like completely awful, you could say it's using technology to control society in a very kind of um what's the word, micro way. And of course, I always think of the movie Gattaca, which I don't know if you've ever seen it. I
I
mean,
don't think I have actually.
it's a fascinating, fascinating movie, and I do recommend it. Not to scare you, but just to again, to understand kind of what are the options here, right? And I think again, going back to something we were talking about earlier, which is what we ritualize, we need not live out as melodrama in our outer world. And that goes both individually and collectively. And so the more people can kind of look at the spectrum of deep, dark, I don't know, fascist side of humanity versus we can build, Jupiter optimism, a structure, a container, Saturn, of society that embraces the brotherhood, sisterhood of the human species, Aquarius. So here, those are the two ends of the spectrum. Let's recognize it as such, and then kind of work our way towards the bit that would be nicer for everybody else.
To be nicer. Well, something you said too, you were talking about like the banking, was it Jupiter or Saturn that rules banking? And then you've got Uranus in Taurus, which would also, you said one of them was greed. I think it was Jupiter.
Jupiter is greed. Yeah,
And then you've
in
got
its lower octave. Yeah.
Uranus in Taurus, which can also be seen as banking. So I wonder if there's like, and you were talking about the currencies. I wonder if there's a rebellion going on there in the banking, how that's going to play out.
It'll be really interesting to see. I mean, I think Jupiter squares Uranus. So Jupiter in the early degrees of Aquarius will square Uranus, probably around 5 or 6 degrees of Taurus, I believe on the 17th of January.
Oh, so we'll know
Um,
early.
so there will definitely be something. I mean, again, with the kind of planets that are further out, so therefore, and also slower, you will have potentially some kind of event that kicks things off, but you won't really see, you won't necessarily know right away what's happening. It will take
Okay.
time and kind of almost like this retrospective, like, oh, so that's what that was all about. I mean, it's amazing, when you look at back at this year, I think the exact conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, which was building up, for a while, but the exact conjunction was January 12th of 2020, and within like a day or two of that, I think the New York Times was reporting about COVID. So but again, we don't understand it in the moment, we only see it when we look back.
In the
So yeah,
after, in the rear view. And
in the
I,
rear view mirror. Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
well, which has been the joke about 2020 the whole time, right? Like,
2020 vision. Absolutely. Yeah.
and I wanted to ask you about your comment about ritualizing. What you ritualize, you don't have to play out. What do you mean by that? Can you give me an example?
So I think this is, for me, it comes from Caroline W. Casey, who is one of my favorite astrologers in the world. And she talks about how it's important to kind of understand the forces or the energy that you're grappling with, and then um, try to work with it on a symbolical or metaphorical level. So one of the things that we're really missing in the West is understanding a symbolic life, which we have in a lot of the indigenous cultures, obviously, but then also in certain traditions that are still kept up in Asia, for example, or in certain countries in Africa. And so this is something that I think needs to have a renaissance. We need to bring it back into the West, and it is understanding life on a symbolic level. So one of the ideas that Caroline Casey suggests is a ritual called the Jupiter removal service. And I absolutely love this. I think you suggested that you're already doing something along these lines, but she talks about how we can look at Jupiter. Jupiter's orbit is 12 years around the zodiac. So for Jupiter entering Aquarius, we can look back 12 years ago. So 2008.
Oh,
What
okay.
was happening for you then? What were you feeling? What were you encountering? What choices was Jupiter presenting you with? And were some of them how were maybe some of them like real choices for you to materially move forward, and how were some of them perhaps these seductive illusions tailor made just for you, but really leading to an empty door at the end of the day? um, and Jupiter is the storyteller, so Jupiter wants to, which is you as well, so Jupiter wants you to tell the story of the last 12 years. What was going on then, and how far have you come to now?
Hmm.
And, again, Caroline Casey says the gods don't understand English, they only understand theater and ritual.
Mm.
So we have to speak to them in this way. So you say, okay, I am going to tell the story of the last 12 years. And then you say, okay, so we're going to use the elements in the zodiac. So we've got earth, air, fire, and water. So earth it. We're first going to write down everything from the last 12 years that we feel like we've gotten the most out of and no longer need. Like, yeah, paralytic depression, don't need that anymore. Um, Neurotoxic episodes, yeah, gotten all the good I need again from that. Yep, let's put that down. Um, you know, anything that really doesn't um, you've learned from and you don't need it anymore, but you're saying I have truly absorbed the lesson from this. So you write it all down. That's the earth element. And then you say it out loud. That's the
Mm.
air element. You speak it. And obviously do it somewhere private, which I know with COVID could be tricky, but do it in the shower, or do it in your basement. If you have to, whisper it, but you need to vocalize what it is that you've written. And then fire, you burn it. So you burn this list and you collect the ashes and you bring it to sweet water or living water, so like a pond, a stream, a river, and you offer it. So that's the water element. And the idea is that you have communicated to Jupiter, I don't need you to, again, Jupiter's expansion, I don't need you to expand these things any further. I'm done.
We're
Please
expanded
take them
enough.
away. Exactly, exactly. Please take them away. And Jupiter will. Jupiter will. So that might be a really nice ritual. You can obviously adapt it. You want rituals to feel authentic, but
That's a
that might
very
be a
classic
nice.
one, yeah.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And it's just a nice kind of structure that you can then kind of work in and out of. But the idea is to have this kind of symbolic act, and that's how we ritualize something. So yeah.
With the Christmas star, are you guys gonna go and try and see it? Will you be able to see it in the UK?
Apparently we can. It'll appear quite low in the southwest portion of the sky. It's, I believe, just after 6 p.m. in the evening, so we should have a clear view, which I'm really excited about. You should be able to see it. Well, you will be able to see it with the naked eye. I'm desperately going to see if there's any way I can capture it on my phone. But yeah, I think it's going to be just so exciting. And I wanted to share one quote with you, or two quotes actually, which I think speaks to everything that we've just been talking about. One is from the astrologer Ari Moshe, and he says, I know what I believe, but what is true?
Mm,
And the other one is from Elias Lonsdale, and that is, let the answer come to you.
love it, Jolly. I'm so gonna kidnap you because I like honestly, I could talk to you forever and we would just like be like we'd be doing that air sign thing where we just like spin and
Ping
spin
pong.
and spin. I know.
Oh, that made me think of this. This made me think of that.
I
Yeah.
know. You said this like 5 hours ago, but let's go back there.
Let's go back there. No, the feeling is very mutual. Joanna, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
And I will definitely put your not your email, your website down below because you are an amazing intuitive astrologer. You also do a whole bunch of healing modalities for people, and everybody should have a conversation with you in their lifetime because you're fantastic. I love you,
Yeah, I'm so grateful.
and hopefully we'll see you soon. Bye.